What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Our initial videos on potential keystone runes for the new rune system was a little bit more speculative than I would have liked, but at the time there really wasn't a whole lot of information to go off of. Fortunately, since then the system has been released and writers have been opening up a little bit and talking about the designs they tested during development, which is awesome because it gives us another chance to go a lot more into detail about some of these cancelled keystone runes, a lot of which could potentially make it into the game in a future date, because Riot does admit that they are developing and they do want to add more runes to the game. A few of our runes today were revealed by Rioters Meddler and Riot Rex on I'm a Cutie Pie and Scar's Beyond the Rift podcast, where they shared a lot of awesome information about the game. It's always cool to see Riot and League content creators getting together to provide some insight into the game's development. Definitely check out the podcast over on the Beyond Gaming YouTube channel if you're into that kind of thing. They get a lot of well-known League personalities on the show, and you can get a ton of pro insight into the game, and in general, it's just a really entertaining piece of content. Just before we start, I want to take some time here to talk about our sponsor, GG Esports. I'm playing in a prediction series versus a bunch of other YouTubers. Last week, my predictions just about broke even, so I won some by correctly predicting the 100 Thieves versus Clutch Gaming match, and lost some by incorrectly predicting the Team Liquid versus Cloud9 match. So at the moment, I'm currently sat at 3rd place in our competition versus the other YouTubers, and I've got a lot of room to push myself back into 1st. And you can also add and play with me on the site. My username is JeremyGC. Just make sure you're a verified user first. And the top 5 viewers on my friends list will receive bonus prizes. They also do weekly $100 RP giveaways every week, and you can find this week's giveaway at the link in the description. Anyway, for now, let's jump right into the list, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it or let us know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for some more videos. Now, our first cancelled keystone rune of the day is one that is going to make Assassin players really sad that they never got the chance to use. It's called Reap, and was likely intended to be a keystone in the domination tree. As the name implies, it provided an execute whenever you damage someone with less than 10% health remaining, which means that if you found a 4000 health tank champion and they were down to 400 health, one auto attack would instantly kill them if you had the Reap keystone ready to activate, no matter how much armor or magic resistance they had. As you might expect, it was apparently insanely fun to use because you would just suddenly explode a target once they were near death. But of course, it also felt like total bullshit to play against because you never got the chance to escape with that sliver of health remaining. There was also a pretty significant lack of gameplay interaction with it. A passive keystone like Reap is useful because you don't need to put any thought into using it properly, but Riot definitely prefers their mechanics to have some form of skill expression, or at least some decision making and thought behind it. We can definitely see why Riot chose not to release this one. I mean, escaping with low health is definitely a really satisfying feeling, and the Reap keystone would have been a pretty BS way to deny people that satisfaction. Now, our next keystone shared on the Beyond the Rift podcast is my personal favorite, and it was shared by Riot Meddler with the name of Fruit Collector. It was an inspiration keystone that functioned a little bit like a bard passive. Instead of wandering around collecting chimes, as the name implies, you'd be picking up fruit around the map that would give you a stacking shield. Playtesting it showed to work pretty well for supports and junglers, and maybe even some roaming mid laners, but unfortunately, despite their attempts to tune it, Riot could never actually find a version that was good enough to actually ship into the game. Eventually, it had its slot taken by the Kleptomancy keystone, but Riot Meddler did mention that Riot would love to go back and revisit the Fruit Collector concept at some point. We know for a fact that Riot eventually does want to have at least 4 keystone runes for each tree, so this one could potentially show up in the game eventually. It would really reward well-timed roams, and you can imagine a jungler planning his route based on the path that gave him the most fruit, so that when he eventually reached the lane he wanted to gank, he'd have a sizable shield to help him tower dive. A lot of players don't necessarily like the idea of a stacking shield, but it does make sense to reward players for taking the time to strategize and plan a good path across the map, as long as there's some kind of passive decay element so you aren't constantly being rewarded with a free shield that lasts forever with no downside. So there was another rune that the writers talked about, but it didn't actually have a name, so it just was unnamed, but it was a rune that would essentially lock your movement speed to something like around 300 or so. The idea is that the rune would essentially give you complete immunity against slows or haste effects, so you really would just be truly locked to 300 movement speed at all times. And although this rune could potentially be useful against compositions that had a ton of slow effects, overall it was actually just kind of boring to play with. There's no gameplay or decision making involved, so it'd be a keystone rune that you kind of just pick and then forget about, only noticing that it's actually doing something when it occasionally prevents you from getting slowed. And being able to pick up more movement speed to get around quicker as the game progresses is a really fun interaction, so being limited to 300 at all stages of the game got kind of annoying and overall just wasn't that interesting, even if it did help in specific situations where you might have died because of a slow effect. Now, the last keystone rune we heard about was an older version of the unsealed spellbook rune that was called Summoner Roulette. Unsealed Spellbook works by giving you a 15% summoner spell cooldown and the ability to swap your summoner spells using shards that are received over time. The Summoner Roulette offered a similar thing in the form of a summoner spell cooldown reduction, but instead of the shard system, you'd get a random summoner spell to replace the one you most recently casted. Of course, this keystone was switched to Unsealed Spellbook, which seems like it was intended to turn the keystone into an actual viable rune rather than something that would occasionally just screw you over, so the changes did definitely make sense. The problem with RNG in games is that it really just takes control away from the player. Sure, maybe you'd occasionally swap Ignite for Barrier when you're having a difficult lane and needed the help, but sometimes you would just end up feeling like you lost because of the bad luck. In fact, the first test of Summoner Roulette actually let junglers lose their Smite, although they later removed Smite from the interaction before eventually getting rid of the randomness element completely and reworking the keystone into Unsealed Spellbook. Thanks again for watching the video. I just want to take some time here at the end to talk about my personal progress on GGEsports.com. So this week we've got the Spring Split playoffs, so there's a bit of interesting matches to place predictions on compared to the regular season. So if we take a look at the stats page, TSM's actually in a really good position to win versus Clutch Gaming. They've got much more consistent and stronger stats just about in every category, and TSM always busted out big time in the playoffs, so it's a relatively safe prediction to make, I feel. So I actually put 3 million coins for them to win versus Clutch Gaming, which is the biggest amount I've placed in a bet before. The odds are definitely heavily in TSM's favor, so of course in order to win a substantial amount I had to bet a little bit more this time around. Anyway, hopefully I can come out on top this week. Remember, it's free to play once again, and you can also win some serious prizes, so be sure to check it out and sign up at GGEsports.com. Anyway, that's actually going to be all the runes we had today on the canceled keystone runes. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any more than the ones in this video, but if I'm able to find more in the future, hopefully we could make another episode of this topic. If you enjoyed the video, definitely leave a like on it or subscribe if you want. Either way, looks like that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.